I've worked this land my entire life. 3 generations of Wallaces have turned the soil here, planted corn and soybeans, watched the seasons change over these same 200 acres outside Ashford, Indiana. My grandfather bought this farm in 1952, and when he died, my father took over. When my father died, it came to me. That's how it works out here. The land stays in the family. I'm not complaining. I love farming, always have. There's something honest about it, something real. You work hard, the land provides. You neglect it, you starve. Simple as that. After my divorce 2 years ago, I moved into my grandfather's old farmhouse and settled into the rhythm of working alone. Just me, my dog Rusty, and these fields stretching out in every direction. It was late August when I first saw the figure. I was out checking the irrigation system near the North 40, the sun hanging low and orange on the horizon. That particular time of evening when the light goes golden and everything seems to glow. The corn was nearly ready for harvest, stalks tall and thick, and I was feeling pretty good about the yield. It had been a decent summer. Not too hot, enough rain. That's when I noticed someone standing about 50 yards into the field. At first, I thought it was one of the kids from town, maybe trespassing or cutting through my property on their way somewhere. It happens occasionally. I wasn't too worried about it. But something made me stop and stare. The figure was completely motionless, not just standing still, but frozen in a way that didn't look natural. Arms at their sides, head slightly tilted. I called out, "Hey, this is private property." No response, no movement at all. I climbed onto my ATV and drove closer, bumping over the dirt access road that runs along the field's edge. As I got nearer, I could make out more details. The person was wearing what looked like old clothes. Really old, like costume party old. Dark pants, a rough shirt, suspenders. The kind of thing you'd see in a historical photograph. "Hey," I shouted again, louder this time. Still nothing. I stopped the ATV and walked into the corn, pushing stalks aside as I made my way toward where I'd seen the figure. It took me maybe 30 seconds to reach the spot. When I got there, no one was around, but the corn was trampled in a perfect circle, maybe 10 feet across. The stalks were pressed flat to the ground, all of them bent in the same direction, spiraling inward toward the center. I stood in the middle of that circle and turned slowly, looking for any sign of whoever had been standing there. Nothing, just rows and rows of corn rustling in the evening breeze. "Probably just some kids screwing around," I muttered to Rusty, who'd followed me into the field. But even as I said it, I felt uneasy, the way that figure had stood there, so perfectly still. And how had they disappeared so quickly? Rusty whined and pressed against my leg. His ears were flat against his head. "Come on, boy. Let's head back." That night, I kept thinking about it. The stillness of that figure, the trampled circle, the weird clothes. I told myself it was nothing, just some local kids playing a prank. Maybe they'd seen me coming and run off while I was getting off the ATV. The trampled corn was probably from them lying in wait or something. But I didn't really believe that. 2 days later, I saw the figure again. This time it was early evening, and I was driving back from checking the south field. There, standing at the edge of the property near the tree line, was the same figure. Same posture, same old-fashioned clothes. Just standing there, facing my direction. I hit the brakes hard enough to kick up dust. The figure didn't move. I reached for my phone to take a picture, but when I looked up again, it was gone. Just like that. 1 second there. The next second, empty space. My hands were shaking as I drove to where it had been standing. Sure enough, another trampled circle. This one was maybe 30 yards closer to my house than the first one had been. That night, Rusty refused to go outside. He's an old collie, 12 years if he's a day, and he's never been scared of anything. But when I opened the back door to let him out for his evening constitutional, he just sat down and whined. No amount of coaxing would get him past the threshold. "What's gotten into you?" I asked, but he just looked up at me with those sad brown eyes and whined again. I stood on my back porch and stared out at the fields. The corn swayed in the darkness, silver blue under the moonlight. Everything looked normal. Everything looked fine. But I didn't feel fine. Over the next week, I saw the figure 4 more times, always at dusk, always in a different spot, and always closer to the house. Each time I investigated, I found another trampled circle. I stopped trying to chase the figure down. There didn't seem to be any point. Whoever or whatever it was could disappear faster than I could reach them. The circles bothered me more than the figure itself. They were too perfect, too deliberate. And the corn inside them didn't just look trampled, it looked dead, brown and withered, like something had sucked the life right out of it. I wasn't sleeping well. Every sound outside seemed amplified. Every creak of the old house made me jump. I kept my grandfather's shotgun loaded by the bed, which was something I'd never done before. Rusty slept pressed against my bedroom door, and sometimes I'd wake up to hear him growling low in his throat at something I couldn't see. Then came the night I saw all of them. I woke up around 2 in the morning, my mouth dry and my heart pounding. I'd been dreaming about something, but I couldn't remember what. The feeling of dread from the dream clung to me as I got out of bed and walked to the bathroom. On my way back, I passed the window that looks out over the north field. That's when I saw them. 7 figures, standing in a straight line about 40 yards from the house, all facing my direction, all perfectly still. I pressed my face against the glass, my breath fogging it up. Even in the darkness, I could make them out clearly. They were all wearing the same kind of old-fashioned clothes, men and women both, from what I could tell, just standing there, watching. I grabbed the shotgun and ran downstairs, my heart hammering in my chest. I threw open the back door and stepped out onto the porch, raising the gun to my shoulder. "Get off my property." My voice sounded thin and scared even to my own ears. "I'm armed." The figures didn't move, didn't respond. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, the shotgun heavy in my hands, staring at those 7 motionless shapes. Then I blinked, and they were gone. All of them vanished in an instant. I didn't go back to bed. I sat in my kitchen with all the lights on and the shotgun across my lap, waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I walked out to where the figures had been standing. 7 trampled circles, arranged in a perfectly straight line. And when I looked at them from the right angle, I realized they weren't random. They formed something, a pattern I couldn't quite make out from ground level, but definitely a pattern. That's when I knew this wasn't kids playing pranks. This was something else, something wrong. I called my neighbor, Bill Hutchins, that morning. Bill's farm borders mine to the east, and he's been working his land even longer than I've been working mine. If anyone would know about weird stuff happening around here, it'd be Bill. "Hey Bill, it's Tom. You've got a minute?" "Sure, Tom. What's up?" I hesitated. How do you tell someone you've been seeing ghost-like figures in your field without sounding crazy? "You noticed anything strange lately? Around your property?" There was a pause. "Strange how?" "I don't know. Just strange. Anything unusual?" "Well," Bill said slowly, "my cattle have been acting funny. Real skittish. Won't go near the north pasture. And I lost 2 cows last week." "Lost them?" "Found them dead. No sign of what killed them. Vet came out, couldn't find a damn thing wrong with them. No disease, no wounds, nothing. They just died." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. That is strange. "Why do you ask? You seeing something?" "No," I lied. "Just wondered if you'd noticed anything." After I hung up, I stood at my kitchen window and stared out at the fields. The corn moved in the breeze, rows and rows of it, hiding whatever secrets the land held. That afternoon, I started seeing them in daylight. The first one appeared at the edge of my property around 3. I was in the barn working on my tractor when I looked up and saw it standing near the fence line. Even in full sunlight, it had a strange quality to it. Not quite solid, but not transparent either. Just wrong somehow. Like it didn't quite belong in the normal world. Over the next few hours, more appeared. By sunset, I counted 12 of them, scattered around the perimeter of my property, all standing motionless, all watching. I tried to take pictures with my phone. I wanted proof, wanted something to show that I wasn't losing my mind. But every photo came out empty, just fields and sky and corn, no figures. Yet when I looked with my own eyes, there they were, clear as day. That night, I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I'd jerk awake with the feeling that someone was in the room with me. Rusty wouldn't stop growling. Around 4 in the morning, I finally gave up and went downstairs to make coffee. The figures were still there, visible in the pre-dawn darkness. More of them now. I counted at least 20. They were getting closer. By the 3rd week of September, I could make out their faces. They were pale, not just white, but bloodless, like wax. Their eyes were dark hollows, and their mouths hung open in expressions that might have been surprise or pain or terror. Their clothes were definitely from another era. Rough work clothes, the kind farmers would have worn more than a century ago. But the clothes were rotting, hanging off their frames in tatters. I stopped going into the fields. I couldn't. Every time I tried, I'd see them standing among the corn rows, and my legs would refuse to carry me forward. The harvest was coming due, and I was going to lose it all if I didn't get out there soon, but I couldn't make myself do it. Rusty stopped eating. He just lay by the front door, whining occasionally, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I was living on coffee and fear, jumping at every shadow, checking the locks on my doors a dozen times a night. The figures were everywhere now, standing in my yard, lining the driveway, pressed against the fence, and they were getting clearer. One morning, I found one standing inside my barn. I'd gone out to feed the chickens, same as I did every morning, and there it was, standing in the corner near the tool bench. A man, or what had once been a man. His face was gaunt, skin stretched tight over bone. His eyes were black pits that seemed to look right through me. He wore suspenders over a shirt that was more holes than fabric. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then his mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, like his jaw had come unhinged. But no sound came out, just that gaping silence. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran straight back to my truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. When I looked back at the barn from the safety of my locked truck, the doorway was empty. But when I finally worked up the courage to go back inside hours later, I found handprints on the walls, dozens of them, pressed into the wood, and each handprint had too many fingers. That's when I decided I needed answers. The Ashford County Historical Society operates out of a small building on Main Street, staffed mostly by volunteers. I found Mrs. Patterson there, an elderly woman who'd been the town librarian for 40 years before retiring. She knew more about local history than anyone. "Tom Brennan," she said, smiling as I walked in. "Haven't seen you in ages. How's the farm?" "It's fine, Mrs. Patterson. I was hoping you could help me with something. I'm trying to learn about the history of my property, my grandfather's place." "Of course, dear. What would you like to know? Anything unusual? Any stories about the land? Things that might have happened there?" Her smile faded slightly. "Unusual how?" "I don't know. Just anything." She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Let me get some things from the back." She returned with a cardboard box full of old newspapers and documents. "Your property has an interesting history," she said, setting the box on the table between us. "It used to be 3 separate farms back in the 1880s. They were consolidated after what happened." "What happened?" She pulled out a yellowed newspaper, the pages brittle with age. The masthead read, "The Ashford Chronicle," and the date was August 23rd, 1887. "Mysterious illness claims 40 lives," read the headline. I read the article, my hands trembling slightly. It described an outbreak of some kind of sickness among farm laborers in the area. Over 40 people dead in the span of a single week. Men, women, even a few children. The symptoms were horrific: paralysis, seizures, organ failure. But the most disturbing detail was mentioned in the last paragraph. The victims couldn't speak or cry out. They died in what the article called silent agony. "They never figured out what caused it," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "Some thought it was cholera or typhoid, but the symptoms didn't quite match. Eventually, people just moved on. The 3 farms were bought up by one owner and consolidated. Your grandfather bought the whole property 60 years later." "What happened to the bodies?" "They were buried in a mass grave somewhere on the land. The exact location was lost over time. Record keeping wasn't great back then, especially for farm laborers. Most of them were poor, some were immigrants. Nobody really cared to remember where they were laid to rest. I felt sick. 40 people. 43 according to the death records. She pulled out another document, a list of names written in faded ink. These are all the people who died that week. I have this preserved in our archives. I stared at the names. 43 of them. 43 people who died horribly and were buried in an unmarked grave somewhere on my land. "Tom," Mrs. Patterson said gently, "is everything all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," I lied. "Thank you for this information. Can I take pictures of these documents?" "Of course, dear." I spent the next hour photographing every page, every article, every scrap of information about what had happened. When I finally left the Historical Society, the sun was setting. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. 43 people, 43 deaths. That night, I did something I should have done weeks ago. I sent my drone up over the property, flying it in a grid pattern with the camera recording. It took me 2 hours to cover all the fields, and when I was done, I downloaded the footage and stitched the images together on my laptop. What I saw made my blood run cold. The trampled circles I'd found over the past month formed a pattern when viewed from above. They weren't random at all. They marked out what looked like individual plots, arranged in rows, like graves. I counted them twice to be sure. 43 circles. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The figures weren't just haunting my land. They were showing me where they were buried. That night was the worst yet. I woke up to find one of them standing at the foot of my bed. A woman, young, maybe 20 years old. Her face was grey, her eyes sunken. Her mouth hung open in that same silent scream I'd seen on all the others. She wore a simple dress that had rotted away to rags. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just lay there, paralyzed, as she stared at me. Then another appeared beside her, an old man in work clothes. Then another, and another. They filled my bedroom, standing shoulder to shoulder, all of them staring down at me, their mouths open, their eyes empty. I don't know how long I lay there. It felt like hours. When I finally managed to move, scrambling out of bed and running for the door, I looked back to find the room empty, but I could still feel them watching. I didn't go back to that bedroom. I spent the rest of the night in my truck, parked in the driveway with the doors locked. When dawn came, I found them in my kitchen, standing around the table, leaning against the counters. One was in the bathroom, another in the hallway. They were inside my house now. I packed a bag, threw it in my truck, and drove to a motel in town. But that night, I saw them standing outside my motel room window. 3 of them, faces pressed against the glass. I drove to my friend's house 20 miles away. They followed me there too. I could see them in the rearview mirror, standing on the side of the road, watching as I passed. There was no escape. Wherever I went, they followed. I realized then that I had to face this. Running wouldn't work. Ignoring them wouldn't work. They wanted something from me, and until I gave it to them, they weren't going to stop. I went back to the Historical Society. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to know more about what killed those farm laborers. Everything you can find." She looked at me with concern. "Tom, are you all right? You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't. Please, I need to know what happened to them. She brought out more documents, articles from neighboring towns, letters from the period, a diary belonging to one of the local doctors who'd tried to treat the sick. I read through it all, piecing together the story. The 3 farms had shared a well, a new well that had been dug that spring. The water had tasted fine, looked fine, but something in it, arsenic, lead, some kind of contamination, had poisoned everyone who drank from it. The farm owner had known, according to one letter. He'd been warned by a surveyor that the well was too close to an old mining site, but he'd ignored the warning and ordered his workers to keep using the water. They died because of his greed. 43 people dying in agony, unable even to scream as the poison destroyed their bodies from the inside. And then they'd been dumped in an unmarked mass grave and forgotten. "Where was this well?" I asked Mrs. Patterson. She pulled out an old survey map. According to this, it was here. She pointed to a spot on the map. My barn. The well had been where my barn now stood. I drove home with a terrible certainty growing in my chest. I knew what I was going to find. The barn had a concrete floor that my grandfather had poured sometime in the 1950s. But in the back corner, there was an area where the concrete had cracked and settled. I'd always meant to fix it, but never got around to it. I grabbed a sledgehammer from my truck and started breaking up that section of concrete. 3 feet down, I found the well. It was old, lined with stones, and sealed with a wooden cap that had mostly rotted away. I could smell the water down there, stagnant and foul. I shined my flashlight down into it and saw something floating on the surface. Dead birds, dozens of them. Nothing could drink from that water and live. Even after more than a century, it was still poison. That night, all 43 of them came. They surrounded my house in concentric circles, standing silent in my yard. I watched them from my window, my heart hammering. There were so many of them. Men, women, children, all with those same hollow eyes and gaping mouths. Then one of them moved. The young woman I'd seen before. She walked toward my house slowly, deliberately. She climbed the porch steps. I could hear them creaking under her weight. She stopped at my front door. I opened it before I could talk myself out of it. She stood there, so close I could have reached out and touched her. Her skin had a grayish tint, and I could see through her just slightly. But she was there, solid enough. She raised one hand, those too many fingers extending, and pointed, not at me, past me, toward the barn. I understood then. They wanted me to know. They wanted someone to finally know what had happened to them. They wanted to be found. They wanted to be acknowledged. "I know where you are," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know what happened to you." She lowered her hand. For a moment, I thought I saw something in those hollow eyes. Relief, maybe, or hope. Then she turned and walked back down the steps, rejoining the others. They didn't leave, but they didn't come any closer either. They just stood there, waiting. The next morning, I called the county coroner's office. "I think I found a mass grave on my property," I said. They didn't believe me at first, but I was persistent, and eventually they sent someone out to investigate. When they confirmed that there were indeed human remains buried in my north field, everything changed very quickly. The excavation took 2 weeks. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, archaeologists, forensic anthropologists. They found all 43 bodies, buried in 3 rows, laid out side by side with no markers, no coffins, nothing. Just bodies in the dirt. The story made the local news. Lost cemetery discovered on Ashford Farm. They interviewed me, and I told them about finding the well, about researching the history of the property. I didn't mention the figures. I didn't mention what I'd been seeing for the past month. The county arranged for the remains to be removed and given proper burials in the Ashford Cemetery. There was a small ceremony. Mrs. Patterson read the names from her list. A local minister said some words about remembering the forgotten. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The first night after the burial, I saw them in the cemetery, all 43 of them, standing among the fresh graves. The young woman in front, staring at me. They weren't at peace. Moving them hadn't helped. Over the next week, things got worse. Bill Hutchins lost 3 more cattle. 2 other neighboring farmers reported equipment failures and sick livestock. Mrs. Patterson died in her sleep. The doctor said her heart just stopped. No warning, no explanation. I attended her funeral and saw one of the figures standing at the edge of the cemetery, watching. I realized with growing horror that I'd made a mistake. I'd thought they wanted to be properly buried, to be remembered. But that wasn't it at all. They weren't haunting the place they'd died. They were haunting me because I'd disturbed them, because I'd moved them from where they'd been laid to rest, unmarked and forgotten though it was. I'd broken some kind of barrier, and now they were loose, and they were spreading. I did something then that I could go to jail for. I don't care. I had to fix this. I waited until dark, drove to the cemetery, and dug up all 43 graves. It took me 3 nights, working by flashlight, filling my truck bed with bones and rotted cloth. Every moment I expected to be caught, arrested. But nobody stopped me. I brought them home, back to my land, back to where they'd first been buried. I dug 43 individual graves in my back field, the one that slopes down toward the creek. I dug them deep and proper. I buried each set of remains separately, with care, with respect. I marked each grave with a wooden cross. I couldn't afford headstones, not for all of them, but I wrote their names on the crosses, all 43 names from Mrs. Patterson's list. It took me every penny I had saved, and I still had to take out a loan. But I bought headstones for all of them. Simple ones, but proper. I had them installed over the course of a month. I planted flowers on each grave. When I was done, I stood in that field of graves and waited. They came at dusk, as I knew they would, all 43 of them, materializing one by one among the headstones. They didn't approach me. They just stood there, each one beside their own grave. And for the first time since this all started, I didn't feel afraid. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry for disturbing you. I'm sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry it took so long for anyone to care." The young woman tilted her head slightly, looking at me with those hollow eyes. "I'll take care of them," I said. "The graves. I'll tend them. I promise." She didn't respond. None of them did. But something in the air changed. The oppressive weight of dread that had been pressing down on me for weeks lifted slightly. They didn't leave, though. As the sun set and darkness fell, they remained, standing among their graves, watching. I see them every evening now. When dusk comes and the light turns golden, they appear in the field. Sometimes all of them, sometimes just a few. They don't come near the house anymore. They don't follow me. They just stand among their graves, silent sentinels. I tried to leave once, packed up my truck with everything I owned and drove away. I made it about 5 miles before I saw her standing in the middle of the road. The young woman. Behind her, the others were appearing, one by one, blocking my way. I turned around and went home. I understand now. This is where I belong. This land is mine, but it's also theirs. I'm bound to it, and through it, bound to them. I'm the keeper of their graves, the only one who remembers, the only one who cares. The farm is doing poorly. I can't bring myself to plant over their graves, which means I've lost a good chunk of my acreage. The bank is getting impatient about my loans. I'm probably going to lose this place eventually. But I can't leave. Every time I try, they stop me. Rusty died last week. Just lay down and didn't wake up. I buried him out by the graves. Now there are 44 markers in that field. I know how this ends. I've known for a while now. I'm 34 years old, but I feel ancient. I'm not sleeping. I'm barely eating. I can feel myself wasting away, the same way Rusty did. The land is taking me, slowly, pulling me down into itself. When I die, and it'll be soon, I can feel it. They'll bury me somewhere else. The cemetery in town, probably, next to my father and grandfather. But it won't matter. I'll come back here, to this field, to stand among the others at dusk, a silent figure among 43 silent figures. 44 graves in the field now. Soon there will be 45. And maybe, someday, someone else will buy this land. They'll see us standing in the field at dusk and wonder what we are, what we want. Maybe they'll be smart enough to leave it alone, or maybe they'll try to help us like I did. And then there will be 46. The figures are in my yard right now. I can see them from my kitchen window. They're closer than usual. The young woman is standing on my porch. I can hear her weight on the boards, that slow creak of footsteps. She's at the door now. I think it's time.